welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. And we have Ann Morrison here, and hopefully we'll hear the cock crowing one time, not three times. We'll hear Professor McCanney, who's off, I believe, as far away as Siberia, is the latest notice that I've heard. Ann, are you there?
I am here, Dr. Bill.
You've got some amazing news. By the way, every week you do some great research, and I have to thank you for your research in terms of all the topics you cover. When we see the hard science, and this isn't conspiracy theory, it should be very shocking to people what's going on with the biosphere, what's happening with the coevolution of multiple viruses, which are being pushed along by increased ultraviolet background, X-ray, and cosmic radiation that's striking the Earth because of the change in the activity of the sun, the decrease in the ozone layer, and many other things. And of course, there's evidence that you're going to talk about today that there's a new version of a dog flu that, looking at the gene ontogeny, indicates it's probably been bioengineered to be a new recombinant that didn't occur spontaneously in the environment. These are scary things. It indicates that there is a move about by powers that be, I call the POB, that they want to change the biosphere to contract the available land and water and food for the population of the planet. They are destroying many of the species and accelerating an extinction level event, and the evolution of these new super plague viruses is occurring at an enormous pace right now. So let's go through all your news.
Well, let's start with the dog flu. The dog flu has broken out in the Chicago area and is spreading into the Midwest. And what this is it is, and I'm sure that you've heard of this before, it's the H3N2. Well, the H3N2 variant was the flu virus that put so many people in the hospital this year. So what's going on here? Is this the same H3N2? As it turns out, it isn't. But it is a new dog flu with the H3N2, but it's a variant of it. And
where did it come from? Which continent did it arrive from?
They think that it came out of China, and that it's they don't know how it got to Chicago. I mean, this is not something that would have been carried by birds, so they're kind of run out of excuses on how these...
unless we include silver birds, aluminum-coated silver birds, otherwise known as international aircraft.
Yes, I think it probably did come in by aircraft, and probably deliberately, and it may have come out of a laboratory, a biolab in China. But in any case, we've had dog flu before, and it's also been an H3N2. And they developed a vaccine because a lot of dogs are kept in kennels, and they're kept with other dogs, and so they didn't want it to spread, so they have a vaccine for the H3N2 dog flu. But as it turns out, that vaccine doesn't work against this one, and so they got to looking at it, and what it looks like is that it is a subtype of the dog flu, and you might think that, well, H3N2, I've heard about that causes human sickness and even death. Or am I going to die from touching my dog? Well, no, as it turns out, their nomenclature, the H3N2, just means that there are 3 H's and 2 N's attached. Now, there are 16 H's altogether, and there are 9 N's. So any combination of 3 H's and 2 N's will give you H3N2. That's not very descriptive, is it, Dr. Bill?
No.
So we have...
Yeah, in other words, it's confusing unless you look at the actual gene map that you have laid out there. What you're seeing now, if you look at the map closely, this is not a spontaneously recombinant dog virus. And the way it got here seems very bizarre.
It does seem very bizarre. It is... They say that it came out of the dog populations in southern China and South Korea. Of course, the Chinese do not keep dogs as pets. They keep them as food. So how it got over here is, I guess somebody brought their dog over here to eat it. I'm not sure about that. The current outbreak is a more severe strain of the virus, which allows the dogs to develop the disease faster. And the Symptoms include persistent and lingering cough, lethargic behavior, poor appetite, and fever. Now, I just heard as a soundbite that it's causing hemorrhage in the lungs. What else do we know that causes hemorrhage? H5N1. H5N1 will cause hemorrhage. So
it causes what's called a local cytokine storm, and you get a mass release of complement activating factors and hemorrhagic factors, cytokines like TNF alpha, IFN gamma, etc. And a massive rupturing of the cells. It goes through a release of peroxisomes and lysosomes, so the cells literally start to dissolve the tissue. And very dangerous. I mean, people need to understand these recombinants also can jump between animals, like the dogs, back to humans if it gets the number of genes for the receptor binding domain of humans. But humans now are a vector of this disease, aren't they?
That's right. If you touch or pet a dog that has this new H3N2 dog flu, then if you touch a dog that does not, you can spread it to that dog. So now humans are part of the vectoring of this dog flu. They're very worried about it because it has the potential of killing dogs. And not only that, they don't have any treatment for it, so they can't, it becomes a burden economically because a lot of people board their dogs or one thing or another, and you have to keep them separated until this thing burns itself out or until they get a vaccine. So what happens, and I just want to describe this briefly, is that let's say that we have the H part of the virus, and it goes from HA to HP. That is, there's HA, HB, HC, D, E, F, G, all the way to P, and there's 16 of those. And then let's say that you have 9 N's. So we'll start with NQ, NR, NS, all the way down to NY, because we know that 16 plus 9 is 25, and we know there are 26 letters in the alphabet. So we think we've done that right. Then if we just pick 3 H's, let's pick HB, HE, and HH, and 2 N's, let's say NT and NU, that could be the H3N2 that affects humans. And as we know, put a lot of humans into the hospital this influenza season this winter. Now, let's say that we take 3 H's, HH, HK, and HN, and 2 N's, NV and NX, and call that the dog H3N2. Now, because we've picked out 3 different H's and 2 different N's, that means that we probably won't catch the dog flu. But that doesn't mean it won't mutate. Obviously, it's already mutated, and it's evolved into something that is even worse for the dog. In other words, the disease is worse, it attacks faster, and the dogs die sooner. We've had dogs die that are young and that are older, and mature dogs. And they're already talking about it in California and Los Angeles, and they're starting to warn people because, in any big city, you have dog walkers. Dog walkers are, that's a whole job category in itself. And they were talking to a man who was a dog walker and asked him how many dogs he was walking. He said, about 12, about a dozen dogs. Well, if
so it's very likely that this could spread.
All of them will be sick.
Right. So we have a increased radiation getting to the Earth. The ozone layer, by the way, is being eaten up also by the radiotoxins from Fukushima. A giant ozone hole occurred right afterward, and it's never gotten back to normal since Fukushima Daiichi happened 4 years ago. Back in a moment. Ebola in Guinea, Ebola virus Macona, the Ebola MAK, the new subtype H5N1 discovered in Vietnam and the Mekong Delta, HPA1, H5N2 confirmed in Jefferson County, Wisconsin, and additional background highly pathogenic avian influenza, seismic activity. You mentioned about an alert of possible eruption of Mount Zaosan in the northeast of Japan, and of course that's near Mount Fuji, which the magma chamber has been rebuilding ever since even before 4 years ago when the March 11th disaster happened at the off the subduction zone off of Fukushima Daiichi Prefecture. Mount Baekdu on the Korean Peninsula on the verge of erupting. And of course, we know that the magma chamber at the Yellowstone National Park, of the largest caldera on Earth, has been bubbling and acting very, very viciously over the last number of years. Plus the islands off of the North Africa, where the island where if you have just a slip of one island that actually started to slide in the mid-80s, it could create a tsunami 800 to 900 feet to 1,000 feet high, traveling at Mach 1 toward North America and British Isles and the coast of Europe. So people are going to realize we live on a violent planet, and periodically it gets so violent, civilization crashes. The violence right now of ultraviolet light is speeding the evolution of these viruses, and everywhere I see the coming of major catastrophic plagues.
Well, that's obvious. I mean, we've seen, they've gone to twice as many viruses as they had just a year ago. And how did they do that? Well, because they said that the viruses that came from China, the H7N2, the H5N2, the H5N8, that they are different in the Americas than they are in China. And they say that has to do with the wild birds, and so they're talking about the flyways. Well, the strange thing is, the birds are flying north at this time. They're not flying south, and yet these viruses that are different than the ones they have in China are appearing in Wisconsin. This does not make sense. I mean, you don't have birds flying east and west, and you don't have birds flying south in the spring.
What do you think is happening?
Well, I think they're being deliberately introduced. I think that there's a biowar going on.
Well, what we have is a biowar happening, and they want a plausible deniability. So what you do is you release a virus maybe 5 or 10 years before, recombinant by statistical analysis is going to emerge. It'll be a super plague. The only way to create a new world order is to have the population collaborate to form an ultimate biological police state. That's the only way. If you shut things down with a coronal mass ejection or an E attack from cybernetic attack from China, from the Tianjin Blue Army in Xinjiang, China, or the cybernetic army in Iran that has a very advanced cybernetic army, or the Russians who are very good. That would really not accomplish too much of anything, to be honest with you. And we are gradually hardening our systems more and more because we're waking up to the fact, since the attacks last year, and I watched 60 Minutes, I don't know if you saw the latest one, they still make the stupid claims trying to say it was North Korea that made these attacks on Sony Corporation. And I know for a fact that did not happen. It was an inside job by someone who was a disgruntled employee that had been working there 10 years. Why 60 Minutes did this is because they want you to be fearful that third world countries that basically have very low-level hackers can get in and destroy your power grid, or various corporations, and can threaten movie corporations to change their agenda. So they won't make an interview 2, which I'm really looking forward to see Kim Jong-un come on for his cameo. I mean, I really can't. I don't want to miss it. I'm going to make sure that whenever it happens, I'm going to get my tickets in advance to see Kim Jong do another stupid thing. Of course, he died, but they'll resurrect him as Kim Jong, the resurrected one, because you see, in the movie, he was such a god that he actually didn't pass any urine or stool because he uses his energy in order to do all the amazing, miraculous things he does as a golden leader of the North Korean insane state. Did you know that in the movie? They actually said that he had no need for passing stool or urine. Of course, he tells the people when he was being interviewed that that's not really true. That's just for marketing to the people. Pretty funny, hey?
Well, we're getting ready to do a military exercise here, July 15th through September 15th.
Exactly.
It's called Jade Helm 15.
And what do you think of that? Because to be honest with me, let me explain what these Jade Helm 15 things are. This is the government and the powers that be, and the maniacs and the control freaks in Washington, D.C., the District of Criminals, to say boo to the American public. And I'm going to say boo back to you idiots. The fact is that they're going to try to tell us and convince us that somehow, whenever they want to, they can institute martial law. You can bring Mongolians in here and have them say a few broken sentences to Americans about getting into truck. You can put black ski masks on them and give them body armor and AR-15 machine guns and do all kinds of other fancy stuff. It's not going to be able to take on 94 million armed-to-the-teeth Americans who, especially during the terms of Obama, is the best gun salesman in human history. The fact is, Jade Helm is just another scare tactic to tell people, be very afraid, we can martial law you. Well, bring it on, idiots. You bring it on, and I guarantee you'll hear a lock and load sound that will be heard across the country without a PA system. You'll have every capital marched on by every citizen in the United States. We will take over every capital, including Washington, D.C., and we will have the Army march with us because the Joint Chiefs of Staff do not want to face 94 million armed and pissed off Americans. This Jade Helm is just another piece of garbage that the media and the big government maniac control freaks that have put out Obamacare to kill elderly people and control everybody want to frighten people into believing that they can do martial law. They can do three things. They can shut off the internet temporarily until we get peer-to-peer networks. They can put people at your bank to make sure you can't get your ATM or get your money out, which is easy to do. They can throw a switch and do that. And they can put armored personnel carriers and rocket launchers and other things and tanks on the freeways to shut off any interstate or commercial travel on the major roads. If they do anything more than that, while they're wearing their black ski masks and their other material, we, with armor-piercing weapons, will take them all down to Chinatown and send them home so they're not going home to mama. So if you're in Special Forces and you want to take on 23 million armed reserve Americans who've been in the armed forces, and a lot more Americans that are hunters and have guns like me, you're just going to face a very premature death. So the idea they're going to do to Jade Helm, to me, is just an irritant to frighten people and to do more mind melding with the population to say, be afraid of us, we can martial law you. They can't martial law anything. All they can do is they can tick us off enough that we will eventually develop new cryptocurrencies, new ways of a peer-to-peer network and encrypt on the cyberspace so we can completely avoid even their regular internet. So they can't stop our broadcast, they can't stop what we're doing. And if they dare to shut down our communities and our cities, we will have overlords in every city and town that will basically crush them like a bug. And that's the facts. So if you're out there listening and you're in the federal government, or you think you're going to bring an army or bring in foreign armies on American soil, bring it on, idiots. Bring it on.
Well, these are going to be, this exercise is going to be conducted throughout Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada.
Yeah, because they're afraid of Texans. Texans have got a titanium backbone. They try to take off Texans, man. Texas has to vote every June even to stay in the Union. They have to vote to stay in America. And if Texas left, America will fall apart like a bad Jenga puzzle. It's ridiculous.
Well, they're planning this.
Ridiculous.
Attention taxpayers.
Welcome back. And right in the studio, I have some guests popping in from Edmonton, Alberta. Blaine and his wife. Introduce your names.
Oh, Dr. Bell, we're Blaine and Bev Ramstad from Edmonton.
Edmonton, and of course, Blaine, you have, I guess, a photocopy up in Edmonton of Dr. Bill's Dexter's lab. You have a lot of the equipment, the QRMA and the Bioplasm NLS, and you take all the supplements. It's probably transformed your health and saved you from an early demise or less health. But it's great to have you down here. And the main thing I want to do is I want to make sure that you squirm.
Oh.
I'm going to ask you a tough question. Now, do you think Canadians make good preppers?
They absolutely do.
They do. In fact, you have to prep to live there.
You do.
In fact, the average American that lives in a relatively benign climate doesn't have to prep. They can pretty well, you even just throw a tent out and you can survive, say, in Oregon, even if it's rainy. But in Canada, if you're not a prepper, you don't just have a bad day, you have an early demise.
Yes. Our climate goes from 80 to 90 degrees above. It can get as low as 30 to 40 below.
Yeah, in fact, Edmonton is, believe it or not, warmer than most parts of the United States in the summertime.
In the summertime.
In the summertime. And in the wintertime, with the Alberta Clippers that come down from the Arctic Circle, it's pretty vicious.
Yes.
And people need to understand that. So Canadian, by the way, and this is the other interesting thing, a lot of people don't realize, although there's some communists in the Canadian government, including starting off with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who tried to turn Canada into a communist country, there's a lot of really solid, what I call patriot-type Canadians that believe in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which, believe it or not, most Canadians adhere to much more avidly than many Americans to the U.S. Constitution. And so when they try to register all the Canadian guns, and I know you're an expert on guns, I think you have a gun range up in Edmonton.
Yes, I do.
That the interesting thing is Canadians said they didn't even confront the Canadian government. They didn't matter whether there's an RCMP office next door. We're not bringing our guns in. And so the Canadian government decided it was so embarrassing that nobody was registering their guns. They said, guess what? We're just going to strike the law because those Canadians, they're worse than those Americans. They're not going to argue with us. They're just not going to bring them in.
Mm-hmm. There was no compliance by the public?
None. Virtually none. Yeah.
So the government was left just in that situation?
Embarrassed. You know, there's nothing worse than being a politician in an office like in Ottawa, Canada, or Washington, D.C., the District of Criminals, and realizing you're impotent. Mm-hmm. You know, especially someone like Hillary Clinton. I call her Hillary Rotten Clinton, who wants to become the Wicked Witch of the West and become the dictator. And if you saw the SNL skit with the person that was made up as Hillary, and they were softballing it, but they're saying, you know, I'm busy working on my 10,000 first things I'm going to do as President of the United States. But maybe I won't run, she says, you know, on the skit, right? And the fact is, if we have Hillary, she is the best candidate for Antichrist in human history. And if you actually look at it and you discern it very logically, you see that the Antichrist has to be one, either a bisexual male or a lesbian female, period. And that's a, thus saith the Lord. That's not just my opinion. It's actually right out of the Bible. Those are scriptures. If you're a biblical scholar, you realize it's not a normal person.
Yeah. So if she gets in, the United States is in.
Well, we got the anti-pope in the Vatican right now, who basically says, I don't care if you're a good atheist, as long as you're a nice person and you pat the dogs on the head and you don't kill babies. Well, at least you kill them in the womb. You don't kill them out in the street. You're okay. So it's pretty wild now. So what would you say to Canadians? Because, you know, when I traveled up in 2000 to It's a New Day Ministries with Betty and Willard Teason, one of the things that was quite remarkable is Willard knew that I'm a bit of a firecracker, and he figured, well, my God, Deagle, I know what you do on your traveling around with the Prophecy Club, because I was on Prophecy Club Radio, and I also had a show with Mark Allen Curry, a comedian, on Clear Channel for a number of years when I was in Colorado. And Mark is a comedian. We get down to the Clear Channel studios in Denver, and we do a show 2 hours a week on a Wednesday night, and we crack lots of jokes. We try to make people uncomfortable, and we try to teach people, which is what we try to do. I believe the most important thing is to make sure people are not allowed to have an apathetic emotional response. They can hate our guts, they can love us, but apathy is vile. And what we try to do is make people think, and again, sometimes it hurts. You can smell burning rubber, and there's steam and smoke coming out of their ears, and they start to think. I tell people it's not whether we have all the answers, but will we have better questions. So if you ask a question, you actually start to own the truth. Since you've been listening to the show for a number of years, and you're a smart guy, and your wife, what were the key things that you thought you learned from listening to the show, or made you think differently about the nature of health, or geopolitics, or spirituality? What were the things that you found, Blaine?
Well, actually, we really appreciate that you've made us into our own doctors.
Right, Dr. You.
We take care of ourselves, though.
You have to.
Yes.
Yeah, same thing, by the way, we're going to bring on back the jurisdictionary director, Dr. Fred Graves, because we want people to be their own lawyers as well. And my book, Dr. You, will be out by the summer, the first edition. It was originally going to be a little series of ebooks. Now it's going to be a mega book. And if you get this tome, it'll either be on ebooks, it'll be on your iPad or iPhone, or a ring binder. You can flip it out, and it'll tell you everything, right from the natural therapies to what are the appropriate investigations, like, you know, MR arthrograms, to quantitative EEG, to genetic tests, to toxicology. Everything is going to be in there from A to Z. So whether you're a health professional or professional trainer, or just a person that's smart and wants to make sure that the doctors don't get their paws on you and do unnecessary or stupid things, which they're extremely good at. That's why I refer to most doctors as GPs, or as generally pathetic, and the specialists as how many surgeons can you dance on the head of a pin. You know, the problem is, if they have a scalpel in their hand, they are going to cut. And if you happen to have a knee, you actually qualify for knee surgery. So,
well, that's how they're trained, and that's what they know.
Well, it's a business, you know. It's like the play by Voltaire 240 years ago, and the older doctor comes back after a 2 or 3 week vacation. The younger doctor says that Mrs. Such and Such, with a long French name, that patient that's been aggravating you for all these years with all her health problems and driving you crazy, I cured her. He says, we treat disease. The older doctor says, we do not cure it. So what do you think of that, Ann? Is that that's unfortunately the situation, isn't it?
Well, you know, doctors treat, God heals, and you got to put things in perspective.
Now, they brought out this Ebola, it's called a monoclonal antibody, It actually, the approach to pretty well every disease is stupid. The first thing you want to do, if you want to stop a pathogen, you have to realize antibodies do not kill anything. They tag a pathogen. So, for example, if you wanted to create an antibody against a specific illness, you'd simply develop an antibody, a monoclonal antibody against all the pathogens. So you'd have a bank of them. And you'd also have a bank of T cells that would actually be ready to infusion to somebody that would actually kill a specific pathogen. The idea, for example, same way with cancer, you could make if you were able to do granulocytes that were specifically designed to kill a specific type of solid tumor, that would be a much more logical approach to cancer after you strip off the fibronectin capsule and stimulate the epigenetics with the ellagic acid and malignoblock than the approach right now where they take a commando approach of radiate it with protons or x-rays or cut it out or give what I call paint by numbers chemotherapy. And of course, a lot of it's driven by business. The same way as the big chemo, big pharma. When you have fee codes, like in the country of Canada, and again, as I say, Canada is great. You can get hangnail medicine at the speed of light, but if you have something novel or unusual, it's just not available. And that's why, unfortunately, why people, even in America, go to places like Tijuana, Mexico, because they know Mexican doctors are not under the same kind of, we call, restraint and control as the control freak state medical boards or the Health and Human Services that want to know how many guns you have home and whether or not your daddy likes to aim the gun at the cat. And they actually ask these questions now under the aegis of Health and Human Services. What do you think about that with Jade Helm coming up, Blaine? Because in the United States, they want to say boo to us that they somehow going to start some kind of martial law.
Oh, I don't think that people should ever give up their gun rights.
Oh, they won't. Actually, we will give up our guns, but it will be one lead bullet at a time in their direction. Or steel tip bullets so it'll get through body armor. Back in a moment with Blaine. And I mentioned in the last hour a couple of things, and I'm going to put up the patents on my technology, and I'll write up a short article on how we can get rid of the scalar radiation in using scalar technology to get rid of radioisotopes in situ with Colonel Bearden's patent, Nikola Tesla's research, the work of the Society of the Bell that goes back to Nazi Germany, and the research going on the Hadron Collider on the Higgs field, which is a torsion field, which is the fifth dimension. Time-space and time-space dependent constant is actually embedded in the Higgs field, which is a gravitonic field. And that's why a gravity wave coming from the sun before CME actually changes the T1 half, or the decay constant for radioisotopes. What we see happening right now, and again, you're really excellent in your research on this, is we have a gathering storm of very serious pathogens coming. And one of the questions that people have asked me is to rediscuss the issues of the approach of Planet X. Now, I know in the past, Professor McCanny has written quite a bit and talked about this. Blaine, what question would you raise on this issue?
Of Planet X?
Yeah.
I've heard that it'll be visible by 2017.
Yeah. In deep space, it's only picked up by infrared satellites or Chandra X-ray telescope. It's in the Oort cloud, which is somewhere around 0.73 light years out in the Oort cloud beyond the regular area of the Pluto and the regular planets. The reason why we know that there is a Planet X type object out there is that there are 10,000 red dwarf stars in the galaxy for every star. So if there's 200 billion stars, there's 10,000 red dwarf and brown dwarf small stars. Most of them are not only entrained in orbits, but many of them are what we call rogue, because their parent star that they were attached to has long died out, because the average red dwarf will last between 10 and 100 billion years. 100 billion years. And so the reason is they last many times longer because they burn so much slower. They're only 6 to 7 degrees above absolute zero, but the magnetic field they generate is 200 times stronger than our small yellow dwarf star. What they do, because they have a high strong gravitonic mass, because they're highly compressed, they're only about, say, 20% of the mass of our sun, but they're very small, but maybe 8 to 10 times the size of our planet. They have an effect where they push hyperelliptical comets from deep space that have never been in the inner solar system, and we've seen a number of these show up in the last 5 to 10 years, which means these comets are indicating there's a deep space object pushing them in. So when we see a lot of people say they think it's going to pass Earth, the closest that the Planet X passes the Earth is 55 million miles between the space between Mars and Jupiter. In fact, it's the reason some of the brushes of Planet X are the reason why Mars was destroyed. It was, according to Velikovsky, it's actually a relatively short time ago that Mars lost its atmosphere and its other things, because there's evidence on Mars that there was a human civilization there many thousands of years ago. When I took care of employees working at U.S. Space Command, one of the first things the director of Space Command said to me is, we control every cubic centimeter of space between here and Mars because we have entire fleets that use tokamak fusion small micro drive engines that are not using conventional engines like the space shuttle. And we have entire fleets between here and Mars, and we have space weapon platforms, a colony on Mars since 1982, and an operational mining operation in City on the Moon since the early 60s for mining helium-3, which the Chinese announced last year. They're going to put 3,600 scientists on to make fusion energy possible for the Chinese government, because they're not hiding it like our Tier 1 science is hidden here in America and the Western world. The Chinese have done massive industrial espionage, but they have more engineers graduating from Beijing, China, than all our PhDs and engineers in the United States every year, just in Beijing, let alone Shandong and other cities in China. So the Chinese are no slouches. They're catching up very quickly. They had a leapfrog forward with their industrial espionage through the state of It's a Real Hell, which was done on purpose, by the way, to make sure that the Chinese would have all this technology. But the Chinese are not hiding it. And the best physicists on Earth are Russian. And what we really need to understand is science as you know it, whether it's anti-aging or scalar physics or energy from a vacuum like Colonel Bearden's patents, are completely different from the reality that you're taught at university at Tier 2 science or in the public domain that the media teaches you. They're all liars. They all pretend to know. They have no solutions. It's 200 years before Fukushima's fixed, because they want to poison the population of the northern hemisphere. They want to geoengineer the climate and depopulate, say, California and Texas by starving us out by causing a blocking high in the North Pacific to make sure that we basically have no water here. And multiple reasons for that. Firstly, they don't want us to be irradiated, because having a bloody nose and diarrhea is a bad thing. It'll ruin your day and make you very ticked off at your overlords that are running you. So, when we look at these plagues, I think, this is my predictions, that we're going to have three things happen this year. First is I think we're going to have an economic correction. It'll be very painful by the fall. We're very likely to have this expanding war with ISIS, which, by the way, we're on both sides this summer. I think that it's very likely that we will come so close to thermonuclear war, we'll have a peace treaty, and Obama, before he leaves office in 2016, will partition the state of Israel and Jerusalem. And if we do have the unfortunate activity that Rand Paul, who's my GOP candidate, recommended, is not the president, but we have Hitler, rotten Clinton, you can pretty well guarantee that we have now got in place the Antichrist, the false prophet being the Pope, and we're moving very quickly to the tribulation where the planet is heading toward ecological, economic, geopolitical, thermonuclear, scalar, and biological collapse. What do you think? That's a pretty nasty thesis.
Well, I think that
we can survive
Ebola is going to wipe out the primates. There's no doubt about that. As soon as it gets established...
You're talking about the primate, you have the great apes, you mean, in Africa, right?
Yes, it's called Macona, and they have finally given it a name, and they know that it's different than Zaire. Now, all these treatments and vaccines they've been using have been on Zaire Ebola. They were developed for Zaire.
You know the Ebola was being...
The big companies don't want to have to reinvest money to develop a new treatment or a new vaccine, so they've just been using the old ones, whether they worked or not. And charging us for that.
It's an old RNA viruses change and drift pretty quickly genetically. They're very unstable. So the way to treat Ebola is very simple. You create a monoclonal vaccine. You don't use tobacco. You use something that's a different thing to create a monoclonal antibody, and you create a T-cell line that can attack the Ebola virus. And if somebody has a problem, you give them both the antibody, a monoclonal antibody, and a T-cell line that'll actually go and seek and kill the virus because it's been tagged by the monoclonal antibody. That's how simple. It doesn't matter what pathogen it is. It's the same process. And you can do the same, by the way, for cancer. You take the cancer cells out, you get the gene sequence of the antigenic surface of the cancer, you create a T-cell line and granulocytes that will attack it, you tag it with an antibody that could even be radio-labeled or labeled with a fluorodeoxyglucose, so you can do an MRI, a PET scan or positron emission tomography scan, and it'll show you exactly where the tumor primary and secondaries are. In fact, the gold standard is a spiral CT scan and a positron emission tomographic scan within 48 hours. It shows you exactly where the tumor and secondaries are. So, people say, we can't find a cure for cancer. I can tell them precisely, step by step, how to cure cancer, how to knock out the viruses in any pathogen, whether it's their animal vectors. And what I see is a gathering storm here. I expect sometime in the next 2 to 5 years that if this isn't stopped, we'll have what I call medical, biological martial law, where the population will collaborate because they'll be so terrified of dying, bleeding to death, and having a diathesis on the subway, L train coming into lower Manhattan, or on a train in Canada, say between Toronto and Quebec City, or flying in an aircraft, that they'll be terrified and they'll do exactly what the overlords want them to do, which is to take stupid vaccines that won't work, to take toxic drugs that will toxify them, and to take chips in them that may be laced with also biotoxins. If they want to hit the activator sequence, they can release microtoxins and kill you instantly. And people say, no, they can't do this. Yeah, they can, actually. And the problem is I can give them specific technical details on that, which is why I'm particularly dangerous. And I tell people, if they disagree with me, by the way, call in the show someday, and we'll have a dialogue on air. And I'm taking off all the gloves, and my titanium knuckles are bared now. We're going to have a fight, and it's going to be bare knuckles. If you think you know better than Dr. Deagle, do it. Do it.
Well, Dr. Deagle, I hear the music, and I just want to tell people to be safe, dig fast, and dig deep, because a CME is coming, or a radiation storm is coming, or something else is coming.
Yeah, we know that the globalists are scrambling. Their underground cities are scrambling to secure food and other supplies like crazy the last number of months. We know that whatever they think is coming, it's real bad. And as they say, it's a gathering storm of multiple things. If you're not prepping now, as they say, God help you. Actually, He won't, because you have listened to us and you haven't done it.
So the news breaks. Hillary Clinton's running for president. My buddy Mark says to me, hey,